How's it going? My name is Steven. I'm from Play Standard Painting, and we're here at maCnarB Gaming today doing a little painting demonstration here on this beautiful role-playing game night. I kind of specialize in more role-playing game figures, board game minis, but there's also a lot of different kind of minis out there as well, including big monsters and things like that. Typically, most people when they think of minis, they think of these old school minis. They're all metal, and they didn't back in the day. They didn't have a lot of real definition to them, although they got better and better as years went on. Nowadays, most of the minis that are coming out are done in plastic or resin, and they have a really high quality to them, much more detail than what you would see in a lot of older minis, and that tends to really bring out some of the different painting techniques and everything really well. When I do painting, I typically do a couple of different stages. The first thing I typically do is a priming stage. And lately I've been doing what's called a zenithal highlight prime, which typically what that is you paint the whole model in a black primer, and then you come back after the fact and do from the top, or the zenithal, a white or a light, so that before anything else is painted on the mini, as you can see, it kind of accentuates the shadows where the shadows should be, and anywhere where it should be bright, they tend to be nice and bright. But you don't have to use just black and white. Like this guy right here, since he's an orc, I used a dark green for his, and then moved to a light green for the top. Also, giving that same shadow, but it does a lot of the work for you initially. Kind of giving you that undercoat of highlights and shadows. There are several different paints out there. Probably some of the biggest ones out there are like the P3 paints from Privateer Press. I really like these. Citadel paints from Games Workshop. And also you have Vallejo. I think probably of the systems out there, the Vallejo and P3 are probably my two favorites. P3 primarily because you can thin these down almost to water, and they will still coat. They don't break up. Most of the other paints out there, they use a powdered pigment, and if you thin them down too much, they just start separating out. With P3, you don't have that problem, and you can get really amazing coats. Now when you thin paint down, of course you have to put more coats on it, but typically you end up getting a better job, and you can blend better with it too. There's also Army Painter. I'm not as big a fan of their normal paints, but I love their quick shades. Their quick shades, these are what you use to do washes and things like that, ink washing. And let me tell you, best in the business. And the cool thing is you can get pretty much all of what I'm using here, right here at maCnarB's. They have a pretty wide selection of paints, both from Citadel, P3, and like I said, also they have an Army set painter, specifically with all of the shades in it. I'll go ahead and get into one of these guys. So I've been doing some interesting techniques lately where I have been essentially allowing the ink to do a lot of the painting for me. And Citadel has this new set that just came out recently called contrast paints, which are kind of like that, except they tend to have more pigment in them than the inks do. And so sometimes they can be a little thicker, but they still do a really interesting job on them. Like here's a good example. So I've got this blue here, which is kind of a dark blue, and always take my glasses off because it's much easier to see things when I'm doing that. So his outfit here, I think I want it to be blue. So I'm just going to go ahead and start painting this on. And the nice thing about this is you don't have to be... You kind of want to gloop it on. I mean, you do want to pull some of the excess out, but you want a good bit of the paint on there, or in this case the ink, because you want it to get down into the cracks and crevices, you know, of the model. Because what's going to start happening is it's going to be darker blue on the inside crevices, and it's going to be a lighter blue on top, almost keeping that initial white undercoat that I've got on there. Now, the one thing about doing this is you do have to kind of be careful, because you only want to really paint the surfaces with this that you want it painted. So you can have oops mistakes of accidentally putting a blue on something that maybe later you want to be red, or you want to be some other different color. But the more and more you do it, the easier it gets. And like I said, it's not really that difficult, at least not this what I'm doing here. And this makes this super fast. In just a matter of moments, you know, I'll have his entire cape done here, and you'll be able to kind of see what it happens. And the more and more it dries, you'll really be able to see the job that it does. And it does a lot of the work for you, especially if what you're trying to paint has a lot of crevices, has a lot of flowing pieces, maybe has some scroll work on it, something along that line. All right, so next I'm just going to get the basics of the face started. I typically always start with a darker flesh tone. And you kind of have to be careful with this, because like I want to hit all of the face itself, but I don't want to really hit the beard if I can help it. Now I can always come back and repaint the beard, but right now the beard kind of has a good look to it. Even without making any changes to it. So I want to get a nice covering coat for the face and also for the arms, since the arms are all exposed. One of the biggest mistakes most people make whenever they're painting is they take the paint directly out of the pot, or they take it, you know, directly out of the bottle and just paint with it. Paint almost always wants to be thinned down at least somewhat. You never really want to paint it at that thick consistency. All right, so I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to add some brown to a couple of these details, like some of the bags and sacks and things around his waist, as well as some of the straps that he's wearing. And here in a moment we'll come back and we'll do a brown wash over this whole thing, which will kind of bring the whole thing together. Yeah, so one of the reasons, of course, that I do these paintings, I have a lot of board games, but I also play D&D. And right now one of my favorite characters I'm playing is a little Hexblade Warlock. And of course I actually had to paint him. Yeah, he actually he can create a magical weapon out of thin air. So it's pretty cool concept idea. And of course, you know, being a painter, I've got to paint my own minis. So so next we're going to move on to some washing. So I went in and we painted up, you know, some of the added some brown. to a couple different spots, added a little bit of red sashes in there, and now we're going to come back through and we're going to start laying in some washes. The first thing I'm going to lay in is a flesh tone wash. Where are you at? There you are, my flesh wash. And I'm just going to liberally put this all over the flesh areas. And again, the nice thing about a wash is you're not really all that worried about being precise with this because it's going to do its job, right? You almost kind of want to drop it in there. If it looks like it's getting, if it's too much excess in any one area, you know, you can always come in and they call it wicking it off. You can basically wipe as much off of your brush as possible and then come back and pull off the excess. But I always find it interesting, you know, the washes do probably 90% of the work for you. A lot of the detail work, you know, I've had people, they'll look at my minis all the time and they're like, oh my God, that's all a whole bunch of detail. And I'm like, yeah, it's almost all the washes doing those details. So if you let the wash do the detail work for you, it makes you look like you're a lot better off than you are. That being said, yeah, so I don't know if you want to take a little closer look there at the face and everything, but as that dries, what's going to happen is, of course, it's going to pool around the eyes to make the eyes a little darker, and it'll also kind of pool on the underside of the hands, in the crevices between the fingers, and just kind of make all of that just look better. And then I'm going to come in with a strong tone. This is a dark brown, effectively. So we're going to take that, we're going to put that all over all of the different brown surfaces that we just painted a few moments ago. And again, this will give us all of the darker sources that we want there. So you have contrast. The whole thing about painting, to make painting interesting, you need contrast. The most boring thing in the world is to look at essentially a flat picture of something that, you look at somebody, for example, drawing, just doing a pencil drawing of somebody. Is it more interesting to just have a line art drawing of something, or is it more interesting to have that line art but then also have all the shadows and shades and everything else put onto it? You know, the more detail, the better, I think. All right, so this has been a fairly quick little paint job, but as you can see, I mean, he ends up having a lot of interesting little details. About the only things you really missed was I added in just a little bit of metallics, a little bit of the chain right there, and he's got like a medallion around his throat, just to give you some little bitty details. Well, so as you can see, following those simple steps, you can paint your own minis and get some pretty good little things yourself. However, if you would like something a little faster, or you have several minis you'd like to paint, you can always reach me, private message through my Facebook page at Play Standard Painting on Facebook. You can also find me pretty much anytime up here at maCnarB's. I'm typically here on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, pretty much anytime. Always up here on Wednesday for role-playing night, so we'll see you there too.